May we now hear from Honorable Rodriguez?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good noon to the Chairman, and also to our resource person, Asek P, outstanding professor in the UP College of Law. Good noon, Professor Asek. You stated that the Constitution provides on Section 19, Paragraph 1, the second sentence states that neither shall death penalty be imposed unless, for compelling reasons involving heinous crimes, the Congress hereafter provides for it. Now, you're aware that our Constitution was approved through a plebiscite in 1987. Is that correct?
That is correct, Your Honor.
So we have an 1887 Constitution. Do you also accept that in 2006, the Philippines became a signatory to the second protocol to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, November 2007. And so therefore, 2007 is a more recent determination of our government and our country that there is a commitment not to execute in our jurisdiction any person convicted of any crime. Don't you agree that there is the protocol which we have signed in 2007 and which has been not only ratified but overwhelmingly ratified by both houses of Congress through 9346? Don't you agree that we have this particular protocol, a treaty that has been adhered to, ratified by our country years after the Constitution of 1987?
Your Honor, we agree that the second protocol to the ICCPR has language which says that no one can be executed within the territory of a state court.
Correct. Yes, correct. And so therefore, if you are saying that we have to reconcile, clearly, it is clear that our country has in international law already approved and has committed not to execute. So why are you saying, Professor, now that you are not yet certain that we are obliged by the second protocol as part of Article 2, Section 2, which is now part of the law of the land, that there should be no execution whatsoever in this jurisdiction? So why are you saying that you are not yet certain? The DOJ should always be certain because you are the lawyer of government. You should be certain and should be able to advise other branches of government on what should be, how to reconcile Article 2, the Bill of Article 4, the Bill of Rights, and also the Article 3, the Bill of Rights, and also the second protocol. So can we explain that? Are you still uncertain up to now, Professor T?
Your Honor, we recognize that the ICCPR actually recognizes the possibility that some countries would impose the death penalty. At the same time, while we recognize that presently the Philippines has no death penalty, neither the ICCPR nor the second protocol have express language that says that we can't revert to how it was before. We can't reimpose the death penalty. And what complicates this situation is the fact that a view that we are prohibited from reimposing the death penalty would contradict what's clearly stated in the Constitution.
Well, I would disagree with you on that, Asek, because very clear that we are obliged in international law. Commitments in international law should be followed. Pacta sunt servanda. We should follow our commitment. And in fact, this commitment was approved and ratified. And clearly, the commitment is very clear, not to execute anybody in this jurisdiction, the Philippines. Don't you also agree that because we have passed in 2006, June 24, Congress had already approved a law that prohibits the imposition of death penalty as its collective sense, both houses of Congress, and also in compliance, in ratification to what we have adhered to in the ICCPR and the second protocol. Don't you agree that this again later in time, 2006, and our Constitution 1987. So therefore, the Section 19, paragraph 1, does not anymore hold as far as the present status of our law is. Because not only do we have a national law, but we also have an international law which has been adopted by incorporation in our Constitution. Don't you agree with that, ASEC T?
Your Honor, we unfortunately we have to disagree because we can't adopt a position that would imply that our Constitution can be amended by treaties or convention.
It is part of the law of the land, so it's a reconciliation. Reconcile both provision at this stage now, because we are signatories of 2007. That is now the present commitment that we have to the international community. Now, another question here, ASEC T. You had your provisions, you have your position in 2017, correct? Which is submitted on death penalty, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
How many? There were two papers you submitted to 17, eh?
There was one in 2017, and there were two in 2019, Your Honor.
Yes. And when these were submitted, the Philippines was not yet affected by COVID-19 pandemic, correct?
That is correct, Your Honor.
And now we see a changed situation when our people are dying, and the thought of reimposing death penalty at this time when people are dying and we are preserving precious lives of Filipinos. Don't you think that the repercussion in having death penalty in these days of the days of COVID-19 contamination and death of our fellow citizen will make our secretary, will make our Department of Justice rethink his position to, at this time, again, trying to reimpose a death penalty during these times of COVID-19 pandemic, when all our energies are to protect our people. And now we're going to say, okay, let us kill those who are involved in drugs. So did you agree with that?
Your Honor, that's an aspect that we haven't looked into yet, Your Honor. You're correct that our position papers were made prior to the occurrence of the pandemic.
Yes. And would you agree also that going now to the constitutional provision on compelling reasons involving heinous crimes, in international law, is it not that the definition of heinous crimes on many conventions in the international law, drugs, violation of drug laws, is not a heinous crime? Would you agree with that?
Your Honor, I'll have to look into that on the international law definition of heinous crime.
Yes, there are many conventions on heinous drugs, and certainly it is not a heinous crime. And are you also aware that we are a signatory to the United Nations Convention on Illicit Travel of Narcotic Drugs and the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs? Do you know that we are signatories of these two conventions?
Yes, Your Honor, we are aware. We are aware that we are party to those conventions.
We are parties to the convention. And are you not aware also that in these conventions, which we are parties, these conventions provide only for imprisonment or deprivation of liberty and has not allowed the imposition of death penalty. And we are signatories to this. Don't you agree that we should be able again to be able to fulfill our commitments in these two conventions on narcotics and drugs?
Your Honor, we agree. We agree that we have obligations to those conventions, but we are not certain if our obligations to those conventions amount to the extent of a prohibition to the reimposition of the death penalty.
So when can you be certain? Because we are left hanging. The Department of
so-
Justice gives the advice. When can you be certain that either we have to comply with the ICCPR, the second protocol, and then you have to be certain that the UN Convention on Illicit Travel of Drugs and the Single Convention of Narcotics Drugs. When can you be certain so that we will be able to decide those members of the committee will be voting after discussions and hearing everyone that are stakeholders on this, and including we would be asking the chairman to invite the Department of Foreign Affairs because of the international repercussions. Also, the Integrated by the Philippines with its president, Egon Canyosa, to invite also the flag. All those who are very much have a position on this. When can you be certain so that we can guide us on this particular four treaties that have made us and compelled us not to execute any Filipino at all of this particular treaties. When can we have that?
Okay. Your Honor, for the latter two treaties that you mentioned,
Yes.
The view of the Department of Justice is that it does not result in a prohibition on the reimposition
So you
of
are
the
now
death
saying
penalty.
you are now certain.
For the latter
Yeah,
two, Your
you
Honor.
changed already. So in a matter of seconds, there's now certainty. After you said that you are uncertain, you are now certain for the two. Okay, let's proceed. It is your
Sure.
testimony. So let us proceed to the other two. ICCPR and second protocol.
Your Honor, for the other two, language says that the ICCPR and the second protocol prohibit imposition of death penalty. However, they also recognize that some countries can impose the death penalty.
But some countries, because they are not signatories, Russia, China, not signatories, so they are not bound by this law. But for those signatories, I cannot see any country signatories that have reimposed or continue with that penalty. But can we therefore ask you to come out with another position paper to have more certainty? You have already seen our what we have. Well, we have four treaties that we have discussed. Can you discuss each and every one? Can you submit? When can you submit a position paper on these particular points?
We'll discuss, Your Honor, but if there's a next hearing, we'll prepare it by the next hearing.
Okay, so we'll have that. But I have other questions to you. You are also aware, Professor T, that we have the Vienna Convention of the Law of Treaties. And certainly in the termination of treaties, clearly, the treaty itself should provide for opting out. In other words, to terminate it. Don't you agree that all of these conventions, the four treaties, there are no opt-out provisions?
I'll have to check the language of the treaties, Your Honor, and we'll reflect that in our next position paper.
And in the Vienna Convention, it is clear that you can only opt out if there's an opt-out provision. But here there's none because don't you agree that this prohibition on death penalty implemented in now 147 countries of the 192 countries of the world? This convention that has been signed by over 147, don't you think that aside from it becoming a generally accepted principle of law because it has been put into treaties, has reached a higher level of customary international law?
Your Honor, we cannot say that it has attained the level of customary international law. We know that customary international law requires both state practice and opinio juris. And while there is majority of states are party to this treaty, the fact is many states, there still remain states and very significant states who are not party to this treaty. And that may be an argument to say that the requirement of state practices has not been attained. At the same time, it's also an argument to say that opinio juris does not exist for this particular customary international norm.
Well, I disagree because this particular provisions in the ICCPR goes back to the 50s, and then the second protocol 2007 It has evolved through time, and the adherence of most of the countries, especially the countries that are known to be more developed, countries that have their jurisdiction, their legal, their judicial system being advanced, have practically adopted this, except for authoritarian countries. Is the Philippines, ASICT, an authoritarian country?
Your Honor, we are a democratic republic, Your Honor.
We are a democratic because under Section 1 of Article 2, sovereignty, we are a republican state and sovereignty resides in the people and all government authority emanates from them. So we are not part of those other countries that are still executing, which are not democratic, and there is no rule of law. There is no constitutionalism. And of course, having a constitution, you very well know as a professor, does not mean that you have a constitution. Russia has a constitution. China has a constitution, but they have no constitutionalism because their judicial organ, the main Supreme Court, cannot question the acts of state. So they have a constitution without constitutionalism. Don't you agree with that?
I'll have to look into their constitutions, Your Honor.
Yes, they have constitution. But the problem is the Supreme Court of China cannot overrule the rulings of the Communist Party of China. So also with Russia, this seems to be democratic because they have constitution, but they have a constitution, but there is no constitutionalism. Constitutionalism only applies when we have an independent judiciary that can check and balance the executive and the legislature. So then we go now to, I would like to ask you, because we talked about repercussion. We don't want our country to be a rogue state, correct? We don't want our country to be known as, here is a country who has committed 4 times to not to impose the death penalty, now is reneging on its commitment by now reimposing the penalty. Do you agree with that? That we will be a rogue state if we will pass a reimposition law, considering that we have signed and ratified 4 treaties.
Your Honor, the Philippines is still in a position to argue against being a rogue state because we can always cite that our constitution, there's an inconsistency between that perceived norm and what's provided for in our constitution.
But we approve, we signed this particular treaties that knowing that we had a constitutional provision. And this was later, these enactments, these particular treaties were signed after the Constitution. So clearly we cannot say that, our Constitution says that it can be imposed, compelling reasons for any step. But we have already made our policies by signing this. And so therefore, the being a rogue state, being a pariah in the Community of Nations would mean that you have signed an international convention which has taken effect because there are ratifications as required by the convention, and now you are going to say we are not going to comply with these treaties, international treaties, and we are changing our mind. So that is the definition of being a pariah, a rogue state who do not follow commitments to the international law. Don't you agree with that?
Honor, we disagree that reimposing the death penalty would result in us becoming a rogue state, because we have arguments. So there are justifications on our part to do this.
Well, we also would respect your opinion, but any internationalist, any professor of international law would have to tell you that you are bound unless you're out of the convention, out of the treaty, you cannot. And there will be sanctions from other members of the Community of Nations who will see you as a violator of what you have agreed upon, what you have committed to. And so therefore, certainly, clearly, that if we reimpose this, we will be a rogue state who do not follow our own commitments in the international community. And also, don't you think that with your the Secretary of Justice involved in the request, and of course having justice to our Filipina facing death row in Indonesia? Is it not the Department of Justice in coordination with the DFA and likewise petition Indonesia not to impose the death penalty on a Filipina now in death row in Indonesia?
I have no personal knowledge if we are involved on this particular matter.
I think you are involved because this is a matter of justice. We're trying to get our witnesses, and we're trying to get also our Filipina to come here to testify against those who recruited her to have the bringing drugs to Indonesia. Now, don't you think that if we pass this particular provision, we will be what is termed by the Human Rights Commission as we will be hypocritical? We have no leg to stand on because we ourselves will be reimposing death penalty. And how can we ask countries for leniency? There have been instances that we have also in the Middle East, and they are also in now in Indonesia. And how can we be able to get them be freed on leniency when we ourselves will be imposing it if this law becomes imposable again? Don't you see that this will be another repercussion against our Filipinos abroad?
Your Honor, we concede that it may be more difficult to negotiate if we impose the death penalty. However, we believe that it shouldn't prevent us from doing so. We can always cite other reasons. I think we just have to do a better job of negotiating for the life of our countrymen, Your Honor.
But how can you do that? How can you negotiate with President Widodo there? That you free Filipina from death penalty. She's into drugs. When here in the Philippines, if we impose the death penalty, we're imposing also death penalty. So it will, no matter what kind of persuasive, you cannot anymore because you are now imposing your death penalty in the Philippines. We can only ask that because we are not imposing death penalty. Now, don't you also agree, being our lawyer or the government, that we will lose a lot in international preferences if we are going to impose this? How about the EU GSP Plus, which gives a lot of our products preferential tariffs in entering an EU? EU has 27 member countries. And what will happen to our businessmen, to our own entrepreneurs who are now exporting these products, especially now, ASEC-T, especially now when our companies, when our sector, the business sector, are reeling because of COVID-19. They cannot even be able to have production as much as they want to because of the ECQ, and so forth. So this will again put hardships not only to the businessmen exporting to the EU. The EU is, of course, third in our trading partner after US, China is third because it's 27 countries combined: Great Britain, France, Italy, Spain, all of those. And so if we are going to implement this, we lose the GSP. What happens to our business sector who have been giving these tariffs to be able to continue their businesses and employ our own Filipinos? With this out, there will be difficulty of our business sector employing the same number of people in their businesses that would export to the EU. Can you tell us the wisdom of having the reimposition of this penalty as the position of the Department of Justice, when it will affect businesses and employees?
We hope that the EU should be able to distinguish between trade concerns and concerns of and domestic law and order concerns between their trade partners.
But Mr. ASEC, the EU has already considered that, and it has become There is no ifs and buts here. Either you have death penalty. If you have death penalty, no GSP plus. And if you have no death penalty, yes, we will have your general scheme of preferences. So there is no more way that you can convince them, because it is part of the treaty that we have signed with the EU, and part of the requirement of the GSP. And so therefore, Mr. T, seeing that the repercussions are so grave, the repercussions on international law, that confidence on the Philippines by the international community as a member which upholds what they have committed for, especially death penalty. The repercussion of us unable to help our Filipinos overseas who may be charged and convicted of drugs and other crimes that will entail a death penalty. We will have difficulty. We will undermine the DFA in our country in securing the release. And also, in this matter, I'd like to therefore ask you also. We believe in God, Yusek Asek T. And life is given by God, and nobody should be able to take it. The eye for an eye, biblical, has already been, in this world of consideration of human rights. We have gone through that. The law of the jungle, lex talionis, is now passed. We are governed by the rule of men and the rule in the international community. And so the law of God, likewise, don't you agree, prohibits the taking of life deliberately and being done in the case of a death penalty. Don't you agree with that? That we are also answerable to God.
Your Honor, our opinion on this topic is limited to the constitutionality and the legality. Unfortunately, whatever our moral beliefs are not relevant to this particular to our position.
But saying that the separation of church and state, that's in the Constitution. But while there is separation of church and state, there is no separation between God and state. What is only separated is the principle of church and state. But there is no separation between our God and the state. Don't you agree with that?
I fail to grasp the question, Your Honor. I'm sorry.
The question is, our Constitution says, yeah, you're saying that you're on the constitutional issues. But then you cannot be able to help the fact that, life is sacred, given God. And now you want us, human beings, lowly human beings, to be the one to snuff out a life of a person that goes through a process which may be tilted against poor citizens who cannot get good lawyers, who cannot get Professor T to be the one representing them. Very good, because I admire you. You have very good intellect, and we congratulate you for that. But I don't know why, in this particular case, you have a different stance. But that is understandable. We're in the executive department. But what I'm saying is that separation of church and state, correct. But there is no separation between church, between God and state. It's always there. Even our Constitution, imploring the aid of divine providence, they always have that. And so therefore, I would just like to therefore thank you. And I hope that in the next hearing, when you submit your position, you will be against death penalty. And also Secretary Guevara, because I think that is in your heart. So, Mr. Chairman, I thank ASIC T. Congratulations, that you did well. But we hope that the DOJ will be in harmony with the Commission on Human Rights and all the others who believe that the right to life is always there. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the time given to me. Thank you, ASIC T.